So, Leslie, in citizenship and governance, we've got different disciplines. You're primarily an economist with a background in engineering and an interest in all the social sciences, I think. I'm a lawyer. I'm interested in the overlap with politics, with religion, with history. What do you think of the lessons as we come into what is allegedly the last month of this particular Brexit extension?
I think I would say careful what you wish for. And I would quote Chow En-lai's phrase about the French Revolution: it's too early to tell. And the idea that we can just get on with it and leave it completely misunderstands the fundamental issues about what underpins citizenship and governance, which is constitutional and legal in treaties. These things take a long time, and changing your position in a complex history of somewhere like Europe, and I'm an economist who reads a lot of history, is challenging for anyone.
Mm. So, from the point of view of the Open University and our shared interest in the different parts of these islands, the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales, it's been an interesting time, hasn't it, as to whether everybody fully understood what the backstop was, why that was significant, how it was going to affect not just the border, but identities, a sense of belonging and the future of the Union. And that's probably true. I know you're an expert also on the different nations, on Scotland. So would you say that that's been an outcome of the saga, has been a greater awareness that these islands are made up of different nations with different political, legal cultures?
I think it has for the Celtic nations. Sadly for the English nation, I think there's been a greater introspection. Certainly outside London, but London has the benefit but suffers also from being a capital city, and as Daniel Defoe said, it was the emporium of the whole earth historically. And I think that's to do with the greater inequality between the regions and localities, and a loss of sense of identity that's almost become visceral and reactionary, going back to a past that never existed. I think it's, and sadly we go back to Tom Nairn's great book, The Breakup of Britain, 1978, where he did warn about devolution, that if we have no deal or hard Brexit or whatever you call it, I think you're going to go and see another referendum in Scotland, which independence would probably be won, and such a challenge to the Good Friday in the whole of Ireland that the only outcome of the DUP's strategy of coalescing with this government is a united Ireland, and that would actually be damaging to all of us.
And you've written about leadership of place and people and communities in the sense of cities and regions, even within England. But if you look at the UK overall, I think the complexities of Brexit have made it rather difficult for the media, at least, to explain who is leading different communities. To take an example, the DUP in Northern Ireland, it's not clear in many media reports that people remember whether or not the DUP ever agreed to the Good Friday Agreement, whether they individually voted to leave or remain, and whether the people of Northern Ireland voted leave or remain. Instead, we get a shorthand, as if Arlene Foster was speaking for everybody in Northern Ireland. Now, having taught her when I was lecturing at Queen's University Belfast, I'm not saying that she's doing anything wrong, but nobody from Northern Ireland would think that any one person speaks for all the people there.
No, and when I was Special Economic Advisor to one of the committees in Northern Ireland Assembly, the DUP are, as I said, a complex and interesting bunch who want to look after their constituency, but it's a complex constituency like the rest. I think what's interesting is how the suspension of the Assembly has meant that the Alliance and certain parts of the SDLP and maybe the Ulster Unionists have coalesced around a more, if you like, all Ireland, all Northern Ireland position. But I think it's also unfortunate that the historical memory of the whole of Ireland is lost, particularly in Westminster. I think a lot of, for the Conservative, the Unionist Party, I think they're less interested in the Union, and the Brexit Party is certainly not interested in the Union.
Yeah. I think one thing that the rest of the United Kingdom could take from this saga is beginning to understand, to use your word, how visceral identities were in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Because I've talked about the idea of a resentful belonging or a precarious belonging, that a minority often feels a sense of resentment, even if they accept some of the benefits of living or in and belonging to a state. And sometimes the majority is worried that it's going to lose its majority. Now, that was perhaps difficult to understand from the perspective of, say, the southeast of England, where I'm from, when it was just Northern Ireland and the Troubles. But now almost everybody can understand that if you voted Leave, you might now be upset that it hasn't happened. But if you voted Remain, you're upset that other people voted Leave, and so on. And I guess that those tensions are going to persist, whatever actually happens with Brexit on the 31st of October or at any other point.
Yes, and will take some time to go over, I think, because, and it's a problem of, I think, many Western societies. We look in America, but elsewhere in Europe, where the rise of populism is, I think, where the political elites have forgotten the meaning of citizenship and governance, accountability, transparency. But the idea of social solidarity and identity is always multiple. I mean, a Scottish friend of mine calls me a Cockney sweaty sock because I'm from London, but also I'm half Scottish. So I have, like many people,
yes.
But I think the danger of the way in which Brexit's been handled, both in terms of its impact on what we call educational citizenship, has actually made people more introspective and look for singular identities which actually often don't exist.
Yeah.
And you can't blame people. And frankly, I mean, I would never call anyone who voted Leave in the referendum the stupids. I would call a lot of the journalists who are not really journalists the stupids, because the way in which they communicate ignorance, not only about Brexit, but how the modern world works and what impact that does have on citizens and their governments.
Which takes me, I think, to my own subject of law, and I'm wondering how somebody who's interested in law but comes from a wider perspective feels about the courts taking a bigger role in our constitution, our governance, our citizenship, because that seems to be the outcome of the Miller cases, and even as we're talking, there's an appeal in yet another Scottish case. So do you resent that? Do you admire it? Do you think that law has a distinctive contribution to make, or is it getting above itself?
No, I mean, basically, if you look at our history, it's in the past it was only Danish and then French, the Plantagenets, and the American Constitution was based on Montesquieu, who was widely admired on the division of powers. So any democratic society is on a balance between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And the judiciary is, if you like, the decider of last resort in association. The idea you can put people against the law is where you end up in authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And we've been very fortunate in this country for a long time, if you like, to live in a kind of political plateau. I know we've, in the 20th century had 2 world wars, but the prosperity, the stability we've had for 70 years, and the danger is that is actually put at risk.
I've been looking at my old constitutional law textbooks, essays in constitutional law from when I was a student in the 1970s. This is a book from before I was born, in the 1950s, The Queen's Government. And in none of these books can I find some of the principles which the Supreme Court says are there in its recent judgment. So things are definitely changing. And a thing which interested me in the judgment of the Supreme Court was this phrase: technically the result of the referendum was not legally binding, but the government had pledged to honour the result and has since been treated as politically and democratically binding. Successive governments and Parliament have acted on that basis. Well, I'm not sure. It seems to me that the Liberal Democrats, for instance, don't accept the result of the referendum or the fact that the referendum's significant. But do you feel that referendums have become part of the Constitution that is a solution or a cause of further problems?
I think they're dangerous. Referendum, popular, and this is the issue about people versus Parliament. Parliament represent the people, they're representatives, they're not agents. And I think if referendums were to do with a change in the constitutional position, so for example, if the Lisbon Treaty or the Maastricht Treaty had got a referenda because you wanted to sound out what the public response was and use the referendum to educate them, as they did in France and they did in Ireland, that's another thing. But if we move towards a more written constitution where we don't have to work so much on interpretation, that could be part of the decision making. But then I think you might have to go back to the Australian system, where as part of your citizenship, it's compulsory for you to vote. Because don't forget, there's only 37% of the electorate, so you can't guess which way those people have got, and with full information. And I remember when I worked in Switzerland many years ago, a popular referendum, one was to get rid of all immigrants, which would have collapsed the Swiss economy. If they got enough votes, that would go to a referendum. They didn't get enough votes.
Yes.
But these simple binary choices in complex constitution and public policy issues is in the absence of what we call educational citizenship, where the citizenship is much more informed about the way they're governed. That's a different story.
And finally, from my point of view, I've emphasised the significance of reasons in the law. Politicians are elected, so they've got a legitimacy. But the courts depend on giving reasons in public, having heard arguments from both sides or all sides. An interesting development is this unanimous judgment of 11 judges is very powerful because it's unanimous.
Yes.
But then people begin to think, well, did they really agree? What are their real reasons? And have they gone to a level of abstraction in order to conceal their disagreements? So I guess my final question is, do you think that it will be the courts or Parliament or the executive who will ultimately resolve this Brexit issue, if it ever is resolved?
That's the $64 billion question. I think you have to see the judges, the Supreme Court. It's like in federal systems, you always have a constitutional court. It's where you test reason and you test whether our elected representatives are genuinely trustees, because trusteeship is a crucial part of citizenship. Yeah. And we have general elections. I don't like the fixed term parliament because about legitimacy and accountability, but general elections also test that. But you do need some, like a central bank is the lender of last resort, you need some reasoners of last resort in these kind of challenges, because again they could be challenged again, and again a democratic society, they are open to challenge.
Yes.
And I think that's the important point.
Thank you.